Hey, got somebody wanting to ride their motorcycle out there, but that's all right. That ain't gonna bother the video. Hey, we're gonna talk today a little bit about white bass. We got some kind of famous catfishermen here in this area of East Tennessee. Right here around south of Knoxville, Tennessee, we got a couple of 3 or 4 kind of famous catfishermen guys out there, 1 or 2 anyways. And so one of them today kind of talked a little bit about some various baits that would be good for catfishing. One of those was white bass. Now, he kind of let on like it was a little bit of a secret, and I guess maybe it is that most people just assume or go right to the skipjack for catching catfish. I don't even think a lot of people care that much about using gizzard shad and threadfin shad. I think people just have become preoccupied with thinking that skipjack are the ultimate and the only bait for a big trophy catfish or for catfish. So, which we know that's not true. So the lake is full of other fish, crappie, white bass, brim, bluegill, and any of those baits will work for catfish. But one bait that I think is underutilized is white bass, simply because one, the white bass is extremely prolific on the Tennessee River system. Right here around Knoxville on Fort Loudon, I mean, there's more white bass out there than you can shake a stick at. There's a lot of them out there. There's really no shortage of white bass. People fish for them around here, but they don't really get as much into the white bass as they do like the crappie and the regular bass fishing, but there are a lot of people around here who like to catch them. So we're going to give you a few tips that might help you get into them there a little bit. If you just want to catch them for fun, if you want to fish off of the bank, you can get them. If you want to get out in a boat, you can get them. Either way, you can be very productive. Really now, which is coming up on July. We're coming up here just a week or so away from the 1st of July. And from now all the way through basically November, about on any given day, a man can go out there and wear the white bass out, as they say. So with that, the different ways you can go about it, obviously if you're in a boat, say you're a catfisherman, you fish out of your boat there, and you want to get some white bass for bait, I'd say your best bet is probably to troll. It's just to put out 2 or 3 lines behind the boat, troll around. Where you troll, it's going to be your own guess, but white bass can show up about anywhere at any given time. But you get out in certain areas around the main channel and troll around, and you're going to come in contact with a school of white bass. Now, back in the day, when I would fish out of a boat a little bit years ago, here on Fort Loudon, I used to troll with a little white curly tail. These little Yum curly tails are really good. This little 2-inch white curly tail by Yum is a great little bait that white bass love. You can't go wrong with a white curly tail. I used to catch white bass up under the Pillissippi Bridge. If you guys that are around here, they're from the Knoxville area. It's a bridge that goes across the river, Tennessee River, across Fort Loudon. We call it the Pillissippi Bridge, Pillissippi Parkway. And I used to fish underneath that thing quite a bit, and for some reason, I guess it's the shade, but the white bass loved up under that shady bridge, and I'd catch them up under there, busting, hitting the top of the water. They'd go back down. When they're up on top of the water and they're in the breaks or whatever, you just cast to them. You can cast whatever. You can cast a curly tail, a rooster tail, a crankbait, spoon. It really doesn't matter what you throw at them. They'll hit. If you see them out there actively breaking and busting the top of the water, just throw whatever you got at them. They'll hit it. Trust me. You can throw a bare hook at them, and if it's a shiny hook, they'll hit it. So they're not picky on what they'll eat. When they're ferociously breaking the water and feeding, they'll hit anything. All right. So they usually only stay up for so long, and once they're up, they do their little thing, they'll go back down. And what happens is they tend to hang around that same area for a bit once they go back down and you don't see them up there busting and breaking the water. So then you can just fish that area a little bit deeper. And so what I used to do is once they'd come up and they'd do their little kind of tearing up the water in a feeding frenzy type deal, they go back down, that's when I'd start trolling with the curly tail. I just put out a couple of rods behind me, trolling a curly tail, and get it down 8 or 10 feet, and bam, you're back into them till they come back up on top of the water again, maybe 10 or 15 minutes later, and then you can start casting to them again. But so from the boat, one thing you can try to do is get a visual on them. In other words, this is what a lot of people do. They'll go hit a particular cove that they know the white bass tend to show up in at a particular time of year, and they'll kind of watch for them. And if you see the fish in the breaks where they're just tearing it up, there you go, they're there. Crank her up and race her over there to them as quickly as you can, because they will go back down fairly quickly. Usually when they come up, they're going to stay up for 30 seconds, maybe a minute at the most, and then they'll kind of go back down. But you'll need to kind of look for them. You might even get yourself a pair of binoculars, but that's generally how most people in the boats will do it. Late in the afternoon, get out there and look around in your different creeks that feed the lake, and the coves, creeks, whatever you want to call them, the backwaters, and see if you can locate the shad. And if you can find big schools of shad, then you can pretty well be sure that the white bass are not going to be too far away. And of course, the simplest way to do it is probably just to troll in an area where you think the white bass should be, might be, probably are. Throw out a couple of rods with a couple of curly tails on them, any jig, a rooster tail, a spoon, and you're going to catch some white bass. So if you're fishing off of the bank, you can still have plenty of action, a lot of action for the white bass from the bank this time of year, going all the way through summer to the fall. They tend to push those shad up against the bank. I think that's the basic technique. Big schools of white bass get out there and start corralling the shad, trying to get them to come up. And once they get them up and bundled up in a particular spot, then they go and do their ferocious feeding frenzy. But a lot of times that happens really close to the bank, and you're right there on top of them. So it's a good time of year for the bank fishermen. If you want to catch white bass, this is a great time of year. You can basically just pick any spot on Fort Loudon that has any reasonable depth of water. Now, if you're way back in a cove and it's only 2 feet deep, well, you're probably not going to do much good back there, unless you know for sure you see the white bass in that shallow of water, and they will get in that shallow of water from time to time, particularly in the fall. But for the most part, your 8 to 10 or 12 foot of water, if you've got bank access that gives you that kind of depth, you got a good chance of there being white bass out there, along with a lot of other stuff too. So for bank fishing around here, again, the little curly tail yum, the little yum curly tail, is a great bait. Probably the most popular bait is a rooster tail. I don't have one right here in front of me, but what a lot of people around here like to fish with is about a 1/6 of an ounce size rooster tail. Seems to work out great for bank fishing in that 8 to 10 or 12 foot depth of water. And really the size of the bait is more for controlling the depth. It's not, the fish don't really care. They don't care if it's an 1/8 of an ounce or a 1/6 of an ounce or a 1/4 of an ounce. They're going to hit it if it's in front of them. But it's really to control the depth. So if you're on a lake and the water's a little deeper and you need to get it down, you probably might want to go up to a 1/4 ounce. If you're in some really shallow water, you might want to go to a 1/8 of an ounce, shallow up a little bit. So it's really, the main thing with the weight is just to control the depth. And but one thing that happens is that at times the coves are so full of fish that really you can just start fishing and have a good chance of catching a white bass, even if you don't know for sure they're in there. If you don't see them breaking or busting the top of the water, you can still just kind of walk the bank and fling that rooster tail or your curly tail grub or your spoon. Forgot to mention the spoon. Don't forget your little Clio spoon. It works excellent for white bass. So whatever your bait of choice is, you can just walk the bank and fling it, and you'll catch some white bass, yellow bass. It's one of the things that you'll see mixed in with the white bass or the yellow bass. They're typically a little bit smaller. Oh yeah, one more thing I was going to say. Somebody kind of turned me on to this little trick, and I started using it. It kind of worked out a little bit better for me, but when I'm rigging up a rooster tail for the white bass, what I've been doing what this guy showed me was to come up above your lure about this far and put a swivel up here. In other words, you got your rooster tail down here, you got a leader, you got a swivel, and then you got your main line here. Alright, so what that does is that keeps you from having to use a snap swivel. I don't really like those snap swivels. I mean, you can use them, but anytime you put a snap swivel on a rooster tail, it can affect how it acts in the water. And you definitely need a swivel on there, or your line's probably going to get twisted up. So but that's the way we like to do it. Again, come about this far below a leader, rooster tail down here, swivel up here, and then your main line tied to that, and that seems to work out pretty good. The thing is, what the white bass feed on are schools of threadfin shad and gizzard shad. These little schools are, 3-4 inches long, whatever, 2-3-4 inches long. Gizzard shad, threadfin shad. The river is full of those schools of fish. So the white bass, that's their main forage. All right, what color are shad? They're a silver, bright silver color. So if you use a rooster tail, you're going to want to use a kind of a shad pattern, a silver colored, gray color with a silver blade. That's going to do the trick. You could use other colors, could work, but if you get too far away, like with a gold blade and a black body, sometimes I've found out through the years that if you deviate too far from that shad color, you don't get as many bites. I mean, you'll still catch them, you'll still catch some fish, but you need to just use the shad color, like with a spoon, just a bright silver spoon. And that's why I like with a curly tail, the white curly tail works so great, because it just looks like a shad moving through the water right there, and they're very aggressive to it. Yellow would work pretty good. If you had yellow and you didn't have white, I'd say the yellow would work almost as good as the white, if not as good. But for the most part, probably want to stick with the brighter colors that resemble the shad, and that's just the nature of it. That's what they're feeding on, so that's what they're keyed in on, is the silver, gray, silver, something along those lines. Anything in that color is going to work good.